Welcome back to another episode of the Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst, and today's guests are Dr. John Delony and Layne Norton. Dr. John Delony is a renowned mental health and wellness expert and host of the Dr. John Delony Show. He holds 2 Ph.D s, one in counselor education and supervision, and another in higher education administration. Before joining Ramsey Solutions, John spent 2 decades working as a senior leader at multiple universities. He was also a professor and researcher, as well as a crisis responder. Layne Norton, aka Biolayne, is an entrepreneur. He's a physique coach, a bodybuilder, and a powerlifter. Alongside his success as a competitor, Layne has his Ph.D. in nutrition science and is one of the most respected voices in the health and nutrition space. On the show today, the three of us have an open, organic, and honest conversation about something that often gets overlooked: men's mental health. You will hear us have an open dialogue and discussion about men's mental health, and you will also hear us share our own experiences with it, as well as the tools, tactics, and wisdom that have helped us improve our mental health and hopefully will inspire you or a loved one to do the same. So let's get this conversation going and welcome Dr. John Delony and Layne Norton to the Adversity Advantage podcast. John and Layne, welcome to the podcast. I'm interested to see where this conversation goes when you have 2 PhDs and a former convicted felon. So
It's our normal weekend. That's right.
As John would say, let's party.
The pathology's the same, Doug. We just sat in class a long time, but we're all pretty neurotic.
Yeah, we all are neurotic. We all have our issues. And I think the reason, obviously, I wanted to bring you both on here and have like this open dialogue with the three of us is that, you know, one of my biggest passions right now is talking about men's mental health. There's so many people that are struggling right now. There's so many men that are struggling right now. And I think that often sometimes doesn't get talked about enough. I think a lot of guys have a hard time opening up. They have a hard time speaking up, being vulnerable, while also maintaining some sense of strength and purpose in life. So I'd love to open it up to you guys to just ask, like, why is it that you think we're in this position that we're in, where we have so many men that are just having a hard time?
Go ahead, Layne. What do you think?
We kind of talked about it off camera, but, you know, I think for me, and I was very lucky. Like, I had good parents. You know, they taught me that it's okay to show your emotions. You know, they didn't ask me to repress them, that sort of thing. In fact, I think people who are around me are like, yeah, Layne, you maybe cry a little bit too much and a little bit too emotional. But I think, you know, what I've run into in my life is it's, you know, it seems like the world kind of wants us to wear 2 very, very different hats. You know, and the one hat, you're supposed to be masculine and take charge and be authoritative and confident, you know, those sorts of things, like the traditional roles. But then it's also, you're supposed to balance that with being, you know, very compassionate and loving and, you know, showing emotion and those sorts of things. And like I said, I got that modeled for me, I thought, pretty well. So I'm pretty lucky. But even at times, I've struggled with balancing those 2 things. I think a lot of guys, I mean, the very traditional role of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, don't cry, don't let them see you sweat, you know, just put on a face and deal with it. I know that's something I've struggled with in my life where, you know, I feel like I shouldn't be vulnerable or talk about my feelings because it'll be perceived as weak. You know, I think that there's probably a lot of other men who struggle like that, but I obviously not the expert. You know, I come from a background of nutrition science, but, you know, that's something that I've personally struggled with, and I'm sure that a lot of other men have struggled with it too.
I always go back to, I want to say it was the early 90s. There was a study that came out that said teachers call on boys in classrooms way more than little girls. And that started a spark in the education world, and they hit that pendulum really hard. And at the same time, they begin to pathologize what I would consider, and I think all experts would consider, very normal adolescent behavior, which is moving your body around and wanting to be outside and wanting to run around, and everything became about test scores, No Child Left Behind. So you have all these weird things happening all at the same time, which just pathologized being a little boy. And of course, I'm generalizing here across the spectrum, but it just made being a boy something to solve. You need to have a pill. You need to get in trouble. You need to fill in the blank. And then on top of that, you have like Me Too movement. You have women telling their stories like, hey, here's what happened to me, and here's what happened to me, and here's what happened to me, which is all, I think, a great thing. But it was easy to dump all men into a basket as everybody's of this and everybody's. And so all of a sudden, like Layne's, like, I don't know which way to turn. I want to be supportive. I want to help. I want to listen. I want to be good at this. And then my dad is a cop, raised by a World War II vet, whose dad died when he was 10. Like, there just wasn't a chain of models that said, here's how to be masculine, and here's what masculinity looks like 360 degrees. And then our world is just the masculine voices, if you will, it's a lot of my friends from the military that have to be a certain way in combat, and that doesn't translate to how do I be a dad of a 7-year-old little girl or of a 12-year-old little boy. And so there's just a mix match, and there's nobody giving great guidance. And so I'm finding it's either suck it up and flex it up, or don't ever go to the gym and just hug your kid. And there's got to be a new third way here.
Yeah, there's got to be, because there's so much polarization that exists across so many aspects of our lives right now. And from my personal experience, I found that like identity is so important as a guy. And like, because as a kid, I remember like, I thought for me to be successful, I had to be good at sports. I had to hang around the cool kids. I had to be dating pretty women. And when I was the guy who didn't get any of that, even though I loved sports, I sucked at sports. Even though I liked girls, they didn't like me. And I was picked on and bullied a lot. In my mind, I was like, well, I must be worthless. I must be a failure. I must be unlovable. And then that led to me developing a horrific addiction to drugs, right? And then that led me to being in jail, which inevitably saved my life. But I say this because like even now in the world that I live in, where I have turned my life around, I still think about that, where it's like, if I'm not successful and if I'm not making a certain amount of money, does that depict who I am as a person? And while I know that's not true, I think it's always still in the back of our minds. And I think that once we can realize that all these things are important, like success is important, the way you look is important, and to a certain extent, your health is important, relationships, but that can't be the only thing that fills your cup. That can't be the only thing that validates you. You have to know that you are a good person based on how you treat other people and your behaviors, so that all these other things can enhance, who you are as a person.
Yeah, I always loop back. It's something that I've talked about a lot with my boss here, Dave. And it's in our culture, we ask the question, what are you worth? And we define that with a number. We've put a number to that. Like, what is your net worth? And I think that's a great tragedy. And I want people, look around. I want people to be really entrepreneurial. I want them to be really driven. I want people to go succeed and solve some of these big problems that we have culturally. And I need people to know your dad's not going to magically call you and tell you he's proud of you. The call's probably not coming. And so that success won't fix you from the inside out, right? It's a both and.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Like I get a lot of purpose and meaning out of what I do, and I feel very fulfilled by what I do. And I've always said, like, my happiest I've ever been, it hasn't mattered whether I was making, $30,000 or over $1 million. It was, am I doing something that's fulfilling in my work and gives me a sense of purpose, and as are my actions in alignment with my values? And the only times that, I've always felt fulfilled in my work, but the only times where I've been really unhappy is when my actions were not in alignment with my values. And I think that's really hard. And I think the reason I would get out of alignment with those things is because I started looking at, value systems of other people, or feeling like, oh, this will prove something, right? Rather than just listening to my own internal voice and operating based on that. And I think that's for me, has been a really tough lesson. And unfortunately, one I've had to get punched in the face a few times. You know what I mean? It's like, you think you touch the hot stove once and you figure it out. Sometimes, maybe you got to brush up against it, a couple times. But, I think for me, that's something that, like, if I had to go back and tell my 20-year-old, self something when I thought I had the world figured out, it would be like, just look at anything you're doing actions wise and ask yourself, is this, like, would I be proud of my son for handling things this way? Would I be proud of my daughter for handling things this way? And if the answer is no, it's time to reassess. And that's when I've really found myself out of alignment. But, when I first started kind of getting into bodybuilding and my Ph.D. and all that sort of stuff, it is absolutely true that, like, me pushing so hard, a lot of that was I will prove you wrong from childhood, from all the people who said I'd never amount to anything. Today, I'm happy to say that that's not why I do what I do, but it certainly was for a long time. And what you find is, like, you can never fill that cup. Like, that cup, you're pouring in water and there's a gaping hole at the bottom and you just pouring it right through, like, they'll never. And I've met people like this. It was like they'd do something amazing and it was like nothing. It was like what was supposed to happen. And then they're just immediately on to the next thing. And I think, like I said, one thing I'll give myself credit for is I give myself credit. If I do something right if I worked really hard, if I was aligned with my values and I accomplished something, I'll like pat myself on the back. In fact, my friends like joke about it. And I say, no, like the reason I do this is because I spoke so negatively to myself for so long that if I am doing something right, I am going to give myself that credit, even though it probably comes across as being cocky at times, you know. But I just know that like I've seen what happens when somebody is never willing to give themselves credit for what they do, and it's debilitating.
I think we have to have a broader conversation culturally that we're not having. And I think the three of us is a great example. All of us were running, and I ran to academics and to try to make money, like to prove, like Layne said. You ran to substance abuse. Layne ran to the gym and to grad school. All three of us, I think the underlying pathology is the same. I want people to like us. I want to present something that makes me feel less like myself, because myself sucks and myself hurts and myself is less than. And Oxy makes that go away. Alcohol makes that go away. Getting a professor that says great paper makes that go away. And it's all momentarily. And I had a great professor who said all addiction is cultural. And in some cultures, the bigger you are, the more you're celebrated. And the smaller you are, the more you're celebrated. Or if you are in the United States and you work 90 hours a week, we call you a lawyer and we give you $1 million. If you work 90 hours a week in some of the European countries, they think you're insane. They think you're crazy. What are you doing? Why do you want to die so young, right? And some cultures, if you are only have one romantic partner, they're like, what's the matter with you? And other cultures so it just depends on where you get dropped as to whether you get $1 million or you go to jail, right? But I think it's important for all of us to say the underlying pathology is I don't like me, and I'm trying to find a world where I can avoid me. And if the earlier we can make peace with ourselves and then begin to work from that angle instead of the running angle, man, then you're talking about a total transformation.
Yeah. I mean, pain is a great lever, right? Pain can be something you press down on that gets you to achieve certain things, like Layne mentioned, like I mentioned. And I think with me, where in my journey where I was so angry at my past and who I was and the people that picked on me that I just used that to just go and just push to have more success, to get more this, to get more that. And eventually you run into a wall and you're like, what the heck? This is not making me happy. I felt like I was lied to. I'm getting attention from girls. I have a six pack. I'm making money. Like I have all these things that I want, but I'm still miserable. Like, why is that? It wasn't until like I looked myself in the mirror and said, you know what? Like I need to do this inner work and figure out a way to be able to like myself for who I am and not necessarily because other people are validating me. And I think the reason I bring this up is now, because of the times we're living in with technology, it's so much easier for people to get an idea of whether someone likes them or not. They post something on social media and a certain person doesn't like their photo. They're like, oh my gosh, is this person mad at me? Group of friends post a picture and they're on social media at a party and they weren't invited. It's like, oh, am I a loser? Like all these things that can drive people to then create an idea about how somebody perceives them, when in reality, that might not even be like what they're thinking. It just could be just that they're doing their life. So how do we navigate this in the world that we live in, that it's so easy to get caught up in instant gratification and comparison by means of technology, which is here to stay, and by just instant gratification of things that are just in front of us at all times?
Yeah, Doug, and I will say that I am like very guilty of that. And I've actually had a really good friend, point it out to me to say, like, just keep in mind while you're doing this, like, I think it's so easy to fall into the trap of like you're not getting validated at home or you're not getting validated by your friends or in your business. And then especially for somebody like me who has a bunch of followers, it's so easy to just go get that. You know what I mean? And if you're not careful, like that can wind up in a really, really bad place, especially when you're like relying on that for your own self-validation. And I mean, I've certainly gotten better with it, but I think every once in a while I need to remind myself that, hey, dum-dum, you're prone to the same idiocy as everybody else, So fortunately, I've got some really, really good friends who check me frequently. One of them is seated on this call.
That's my antidote, is having a couple of 3 or 4 or 5 great human beings that are real humans, that you make plans to see each other in person. You got somebody that calls and says, okay, I see all your cute photos. How are you? Someone that when I'm weeping so hard, I want to do it in front of somebody. I got to have somebody that I'm talking to, because I don't want to do that by myself. But if you have that, then you can create some space between that and dude, the affirmation of social media feels good. I didn't have it. I didn't have it until just a few years ago when I started this crazy work life I'm doing now. And I remember it was about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, I was sitting in my closet with the door shut and my kids running around just being maniacs. And I was just scrolling. And I remember smiling and going, "Ah, they got me. Way to go, Zuckerberg. You got me." Like I was the guy. I knew all the research. I knew all the data. I never had it. And I was like, they got me. It's designed to be like crack. And so I've got to create other alternatives for how I get filled up.
I've gotten much better, but I can't. I mean, there was a period of time where, it was like if a conversation stopped at all, like I'm picking up my phone, and again, like thankful I had some really good people in my life to check me. One of my friends, she's a Ph.D. in psychology. She's also like the funniest, craziest person in a good way that I know. But she told me, she's like, "Layne, I'm going to attach electric shock to your hand. And every time you pick up your phone when we're with you and you're not being present, I'm going to shock you." And I'm like, that's fair.
I've seen some of my college students, they would stack up their phones on the table, and the first person to grab for it had to pay for the meal for the whole table. And they were starting to self-police themselves because they were sick of having these engagements where everybody's just staring at their phones. And so there's little ways to do that. Or like you can electrocute you like Layne's friends.
Yeah, listen, I think it's really like, I don't want to like throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like people ask me about social media when I think, and I'm like, I'm actually very grateful for social media because to do what I do back in the day, you had to reach that kind of people. You had to have millions of dollars of marketing budget. Now, if you put out good enough content, over enough period of time, you may not get to 1 million followers, but you can build a substantial following. I just don't think that was ever present, in previous times. So there are some really good things about social media, but I think it's like, it's made us more of what we are. Like they say, money makes you more of what you are. If you're a great person and you're loving and philanthropic, like you're just going to take that money and do great things with it. And if you have a proclivity for selfishness and, negative things, then you're going to take that money and you're going to be a jerk with it, So I think social media is a little bit the same. If you've got some proclivity towards helping people, what better medium to do so, So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I think, again, trying to put limits on yourself is really important. And I say that as somebody who still hasn't, I'm still working on getting it right, So like you guys were saying, it's tough. It is instant gratification, right? But unfortunately, what happens if you just rely on the instant gratification? You don't get the stuff that actually makes you happy over a long term, which is meaningful relationships and, in-person connection. I call this the great dichotomy of life. And what I'm referring to when I say that is almost without fail, whatever makes it easier in the short term makes it harder in the long term. And whatever makes it harder in the short term makes it easier in the long term. And it's such a weird thing. But if you go down the line, working out, finances, like all this kind of stuff, for the most part, it is be in discomfort now so that things are much better overall, or be in comfort now and things will be chaos.
Choose the hard path, man. That's right.
You got to choose the hard path. And I've had on, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dr. Anna Lemke.
Oh, yeah. The dopamine expert. Yeah, she's extraordinary.
Yeah, and she talks about like the pain pleasure like trap essentially, and that like I'm not too knowledgeable about the exact neuroscience, but I think the way I understand it is the same part of your brain that's responsible for detecting pain is also responsible for pleasure. And what happens is when you do something pleasurable, like your brain has to even it out somehow by giving it some sort of pain, and it just alludes to what it goes back to what Layne just said, in that if you are in the relationship context, this is an easy example. If you meet somebody and you end up sleeping with somebody right away, you're instantly going to feel good, right? You're going to get this massive dopamine rush. You're going to get pleasure. But long term, there might be some pain because maybe that relationship doesn't work out. Maybe you really didn't, see eye to eye with this person. Then it's going to cause some heartbreak on both sides. So now you've created some long-term pain that not only impacts that relationship, that could potentially lead into other areas of your life. Whereas, like, if you meet somebody that you really like and you wait it out and you do the hard thing, which is not getting intimate right away, and you get to know the person and develop an emotional connection, like, yeah, it sucks and it's hard, but long term, you could potentially end up building a really special and meaningful relationship.
Yeah, it's even, I think it's a little more insidious than that. So I like to think about it as a teeter-totter, and dopamine's about motivation. We talk a lot about dopamine hits and stuff. That's not really real, but the motivation pushes and pushes and pushes and pushes. And then right as you are getting that reward, whether it's getting food or you're being intimate, whatever that is, your body smashes the other side of that sucker with pain, right? And that's why that next morning after a hookup, you feel that angst, that how did this go? Or I need to withdraw. I need to get out of here. Whatever your defense mechanisms are, they are on full display. Or I need to get really tight, right? It's just your body hitting that thing. So it's not even over the long term. It's pretty acute. It happens pretty fast. But yeah, Layne, that's a great life lesson just to hold on to. Like, the more difficult I make my present, the easier it is long term. I like that.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I try to reframe it because a lot of people, this is so funny because we were talking about, I forget what we were talking about earlier, but, people think that knowledge is sufficient to change things, and it is not.
No, if that was the case, man, we got the internet now. We know everything.
I mean, it's like, I tell people, like, when they say, in my field, like, calories in, calories out, it's way more complicated than that. They can't explain it. And I'm like, well, just because it's a simple concept doesn't mean it's simple in execution. I mean, if you want to save money, just make more than you spend. Okay, so you guys know that now, so just go out and do it, right? Like everybody knows this. Like, nobody is going to argue this, right? But the problem is like, this is tied up in a bunch of other things, dopamine, habits, lifestyle, all that kind of stuff. All of it. And so, I think just having the knowledge is not sufficient to make the changes we want. And for me, when I'm looking at, like, thinking about, doing something uncomfortable or how long it's going to take, I think the really hard part for a lot of people, like, and I'll just use a fitness example because that's what I'm good at, the idea that it could take years to get to wherever they want to go. And the other thing is, so a friend of mine asked me this one time, he was giving a talk, and he said, Layne, how long was it from the inception of you doing your Ph.D. until you actually achieved it? And I said, well, it was about 8 years. Like, it was 6 years of doing it. I had the idea about 8 years beforehand. He said, and when you got it, how long did that elation last? Like that, I said, a few weeks, maybe a month, He's like, so you worked 8 years for a month of payoff. And I'm like, yeah, seems weird when you say it like that, But when I look back now after having been out of it, it's not the graduation I remember. It's the path. It's the hard stuff. Like, that is actually what I look back on with the most fondness. And when I think about, like, the stuff I've done in powerlifting, it's the same thing. Yeah, of course I have fond memories of, like, setting a squat world record and, like, getting a gold medal and all this kind of stuff. But, like, I remember the really hard stuff where I wanted to quit. Like, that's what I remember. And I think that I've been trying to explain this to my daughter, because she'll get really frustrated. She's 6, so she'll get really frustrated and quit something really quickly. And I'll be like, well, honey, if it just was easy the first time you did it and everything worked out, like, you wouldn't even value it. You wouldn't even think it was worth anything, So when I'm doing something that's hard, I look at it as like, man, this payoff is going to be so great because it was so hard, because I'm going to get the payoff, but then I'm also going to get to look back and, like, get so many lessons from walking that hard path, in my life. That's what I remember is the hard stuff, that really tested me. And, still going through that now. Like, I'm in the midst of a second divorce, and it's very hard. I mean, it hasn't been crazy contentious, but, like, all this stuff is still really, really hard. But I know I'm going to walk out of it with, like, a new understanding, and hopefully, like, having, a new perspective on things and having learned a lot. Yeah, I think that that's what really makes the difference is, can you take those hard moments? It took me a long time to grow my legs in bodybuilding. I had been training hard for like 4 years and I still had like twigs. I mean, I trained hard. Like, if somebody wanted to train with me, I took it as a personal insult and would just absolutely bury them, But I still had these small legs. And I can remember, like, about 5 years in thinking, maybe this bodybuilding thing, maybe it's not going to work out. I just don't have the genetics for this. I was like, you know what? I'm still really passionate about this. I want to do this. So I'm not going to allow myself to back out of it. So I'm going to go hard for 10 years. And if at the end of 10 years, I still have small legs, then I'll allow myself to bow out. Right. And of course, like, after 10 years, I didn't. And I was good at the bodybuilding thing and went on with powerlifting and all that kind of stuff. But somebody asked me once, they were like, man, wouldn't it have been great if you just had, like, something that you could have taken that was drug-free, no side effects, that could have grown your legs. And I said, actually, now looking back, I would not have wanted it. I would have missed out on all the meaning and fortitude and confidence that built to be able to look at something that you wanted to quit because you felt like you just wouldn't be able to do it, but you did it anyway. And I would never have the best legs or, that sort of thing. But like I got really good, and so I'll tell people, I think the hardest part of putting in work with these things is you have to be willing to put in the work with absolutely no promise of an outcome. And I think that's the hardest thing for people is to do that work for the sake of the work itself.
I think it's so easy to look at you, Layne, and say, okay, he's a great dad of 2 young kids. He's going through a tough public divorce. He's got multiple companies he's running. Plus he's got speaking. Plus he's got his own competition career. And people look at that and say, I want that. Or how do I get that? And maybe not some of the pain you're going through, but how do I get there? And it's like, dude, you can only hold all of that if you've got 10 years of, I'm just going to keep doing the same thing every day. And I'm going to keep grinding and keep growing a little bit and a little bit and a little, because your legs grow millimeters, right? They don't grow like you don't wake up and they're 3 inches, whatever. So I think we have a hack culture, and I want to just circumvent culture. What's the fastest way and what's the quickest way? And can I just take metformin and solve all my, whatever the thing is. And it's like, no, dude, you need 10 years. You got to it sucks, man. It just is. And then I heard this recently. Someone said, I stopped praying for a lighter load. I started praying for a stronger back. And you get that stronger back through 10 years of putting the work in, man. And if we can communicate that when we go back to masculinity, if I can tell somebody, hey, the masculine thing to do is to keep showing up. Whether it's with your kids, whether it's with your spouse, whether it's with your work, whether it's with your hobby, just keep showing up. Keep showing up. You're going to look up 10 years later, and you're going to have a real strong back across the board.
To your point of showing up, John, I got asked on the Q&A the other day. Somebody said, I'm really struggling with motivation. How do you manage to stay motivated? And I said, here's my secret. I don't give a damn about motivation. I decide, what do I want goal-wise? What is in alignment with my values? And then let's go execute. And my feelings don't have to enter into it because
That's right.
Feelings are important. I'm not trying to dismiss them, but if we operated our entire lives based on feelings, you would never brush your teeth. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need to be motivated to brush my teeth.
I would just be rolling around in a diabetic coma if I went by feelings, because I always feel like donuts. Always.
Right. So it's like motivation, if you have it, I always say motivation is like nitrous on a car. Okay. It'll speed you up for a short period of time, but it's not going to take you any real distance. You need a gas tank for that. And your gas tank is, discipline and showing up, even when you don't feel like it, even when things are bad. And I'll tell you this, my greatest example of this in my life, and this is something I am very proud of. So I'll do my old, when I was going through my first divorce, which was way worse because I had no real, strong, genuine friendships who were close to me. I had a few, but nothing really local. And I had a lot of people who just bailed on me because they were there for the gravy train. So I was going through that divorce. I had hurt my back, couldn't lift the way I wanted to. And I had recently gotten kicked out of a company that I owned 40% of that I'd helped start. And then that company sued me frivolously in an effort to bully me into taking less than my shares were worth because they knew I was in a divorce and didn't have a bunch of liquid cash. So I did not feel like showing up every day. Like, I wanted to wake up. I actually just want to stay in bed and wallow in my own self-pity. This is the end. This is it. Like, this was supposed to be my big thing. This was like, I had kind of put a lot of my eggs in this basket. Like, over 70% of my income was from this company. And all of a sudden, in a flash, it's gone. I got no income. I owe more money to attorneys than I can write a check for. And I said, okay, I felt those feelings of, like, let's have a pity party. Let's just give up. But, when you're an adult, nobody is coming to rescue you. Like, nobody. Like, people will feel sorry for you, but what does that do for you? You know what I mean? People say, I'm so sorry, but that doesn't change your life. And I just said, okay, what can I do right now with what I got to move this forward? And that was the impetus for me to write my first book. And I'll tell the story. In 8 weeks, I wrote a 300-page, book, and we self-published it. And the day we launched the pre-sale, the company walked out of a mediation we had organized because they walked out of several because they knew I couldn't really, I didn't have the money to keep fighting them. So they were just going to bleed me. And that pre-sale, $50,000 worth of ebooks. And that gave me enough money to fight them for one more month, kick their butt in a couple of hearings, and kind of forced them into a position where they had to settle. But it was because I didn't like feelings. I didn't want to go do all that stuff. I didn't want to write that book. I wanted somebody to hold me and tell me it was going to be okay, but it's not going to be, you got to go. So that's what, to me, showing up looked like, in spite of, everything that was going on. And so I've drawn on that experience so many times. My life has gotten hard again. And so, well, if I could do it when it was that, this doesn't seem quite so daunting.
Yeah. I mean, I so relate to like what you said, Layne, and everything you've shared over the last like couple times you've spoken. Specifically, I think that like the things you're most proud of aren't necessarily like when you were at the top of the mountain. Like I look back at my journey, my fitness journey. I mean, I've been at this for almost 15 years, and all the strength that I've gained and the physique that I've gained and all this stuff and accolades as a trainer has been important. But my biggest thing that I'm proud of is my experience in jail and going from the kid who was a drug addict when I walked into the gates of the detention center, who was detoxing from opiates, couldn't do a push-up, could barely walk, to then being able to do a set of 10 push-ups and run a mile by the time I left this 90-day sentence. And that has been the biggest catalyst for my transformation. That has taught me that no matter what I'm going through, I can get through anything as long as I put not necessarily just my mind to it, but I continue to stay focused on the future and taking it one step at a time and just building off of that. Because I think a lot of people, they have this idea that their self-confidence is going to come from when they go from 0 to 100. I think the biggest amount of self-confidence you get is when you go from like 0 to like 5 and you're able to like get yourself off the couch, right?
0 to 1.
Yeah.
It's a snowball.
I had a buddy that used to say the hardest part of the run was from the couch to the front door. That was the hardest part. The rest of the runs was easy after that.
Doug, you said something about identity earlier, and I kind of want to touch on that because I think a lot of people get caught up in like how difficult it is to make changes, and they think about the work. And I heard a quote from Robert Downey Jr. and John, I want to get your feedback on this. And he said, I guess it was when he was going through his, jail time after that period of time when he'd been addicted to drugs and whatnot, and was getting in a lot of trouble with the law. And I think he was speaking to Oprah, and he said, it really isn't that hard to fix all these seemingly ghastly problems in your life. And she was kind of like shocked that he said that. And he said, what's difficult is to decide, because it actually typically means that you can't be you anymore. That your life is the summation of your choices. And so you can't create a new life dragging the same person behind you. And this is even true in weight loss. And I love what my friend Ethan Suplee says, who lost over 300 pounds. When he posts, he says, I killed my clone today. And what he means by that is like, there is still that person inside me. And every day I have to choose to be somebody different. So John, I'm wondering your feedback. Like, that really resonated with me because I find that a lot of the angst is around just making the decision. My brother, for example, was a meth addict. And I asked him what his rock bottom was. Because he went to jail as well. Hopefully he doesn't mind me saying this. And I said, was jail your rock bottom? He said, no. He said, I just woke up one day, and I realized I lose everything. If I get a relationship and I lose it, I get a job and I lose it, I get some money and I lose it. And I just got tired of losing. I just decided I wasn't going to lose anymore. It was just a decision.
Yeah. Oh, man. Probably the most important thing I took away from James Clear's Atomic Habits was the idea that we have a culture obsessed with goals and goals and goals and goals. And I think, and Layne, you've probably noticed this, back when I first started graduate school, a Ph.D. or a master's degree was just like a high five on a journey to lifelong. It was just a marker. It wasn't a destination. And then school started selling these degrees as like a way to make money and a way to credential people. And it turned into a whole different track. But this idea that everything's about goals and about goals and about goals. And you wake up, if my goal is to make $1 million, I'm going to make $1 million. I may have to violate my values. I may have to do X. I may have to take a role I don't want. I may have to partner up with some people that I know are crooks. I may end up filling XYZ, just trying to make these goals, man. And I think there's something powerful about changing your identity. And what you said, Layne, there's something when you look in the mirror and realize I've got to be different from this point forward. And I wish you could bottle that up. What's that old saying? It's the pain of staying the same is heavier than the pain of change, right? When that teeter-totter finally hits, man, it's time to go. And I also think this. I think that we think that when I make that decision, it's that way forever. Man, I've been lifting for 20 years, 25 years, and I still wake up this morning. I had to make myself go down there and get after it, right? I didn't want to do that. I didn't feel like doing that. But I've created an identity where I'm a guy who takes care of his body. And so since that's my identity, I'm going to go get my work in.
I had something recently happen where somebody close to me really laid out some choices I made, and choices that I didn't think were out of alignment with my value system. But after they laid it out, I was like, oh yeah, that's actually out of alignment with my value system. And I realized it was because I did that look in the mirror, but I made a little bit of an excuse for myself here or there, right? And it's so easy to slide into that. And I think it doesn't have to be where you're living a life where you're completely rigid all the time. But I think you have to have some stuff where you go, this is a no-go. This is just complete across the board, a no-go. We're not touching that, because again, I'll just go back to it. Whenever I've acted out of alignment with my values, man, it is amazing how quick and violently life will remind me that I am out of alignment with my values,
That's why I think you had a friend that called you out. I have for my entire adult life, especially since I went and saw the genetics specialist, I have told myself I can't control X, Y, and Z when it comes to diet and nutrition. And it was you that called me on the phone and said, I care about you enough. Stop telling this story out to the public because it's not right. And by the way, as my friend, stop telling yourself this because it's not right. And it was as simple as, holy smokes, he's right. I've been telling myself a story. That's my line. He used my line to get it was like.
It sucks when somebody turns it around, doesn't it?
It's the worst, right? But I had a guy who posted something really absurd to me, and I screenshot it, and I posted it with my response. And I'm not going to lie. My response was super funny. It was real funny. And a buddy of mine, he called me. He was dying laughing as I answered the phone. He's roaring laughing. And he's about 10 years older than me. And I was like, what's so funny? And he goes, what you just posted. And I was like, yeah, I got him. And he goes, oh my gosh. And then he kind of caught his breath and he goes, hey, take that down. And I was like, what do you mean take it down? And he goes, take it down. And I was like, I'm not taking that down. That was awesome roast. And he said, it was, but that's not who you are. And that's not who I want my friend portrayed into the world. And I was like, oh crap. So I took it down and I was pissed at him. And he was right? He was a friend that held me accountable. And so I think all of us step out of alignment with our values because something's convenient or comfortable or sexy or whatever. And we've got to have people in our life that keep us connected, man.
Man, John, are you sure we don't have the same friend? That sounds like my best friend, Mike.
It's probably very much the same.
Mike.
Yes.
Mike probably at least once a week texts me and is like, hey, numbskull. Not quite in those words. Probably uses a different, colorful word. He's like, just take that down. That's not you, And I'm like, oh, come on, man. But he's like, I'm not mad at you. I'm like, I know. And almost every time he's right, And I think, John, you gave a talk when I came to Entre Leadership talking about connection and having friends and whatnot. And, it's funny, until I met my best friend, Mike, I realized I'd never really had a best friend before. Somebody shows up for me like that. And man, it's amazing the difference it has made in this divorce versus my first divorce, having actual true, genuine people who care about me enough to call it out when I'm being an idiot. You know what I mean? That has made such an enormous difference in my life. And just, I'm not going to pretend like this whole deal has been easy. It's not easy. But man, let me tell you what, when you're moved out of your house and you're living in an extended stay, like I was during my first divorce, and you don't feel like there's anybody you can talk to, man, those four walls, they get really, really loud. Really loud. Man, I will tell people, I'll see pictures from that period of time and immediately get a spike of anxiety. If I'm scrolling through my iPhone and I see a picture from that time, it's like my body remembers what was happening. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild, man. Thanks for sharing all that. I mean, I think circling back to this concept of identity and how it relates to hardship. I mean, the conversation that saved my life was when I was in jail and I was talking to my cellmate, who was the guy who actually got me into fitness. And when I was explaining my story to him, he was like, why are you in jail? And I was like, oh, my parents got divorced and girls rejected me and I got picked on. And he looked at me and he was like, quit being a victim. I'll just say the PG version. And I was like, well, what do you mean? I was like, all this bad stuff happened to me. I have that as an excuse to behave this way. And he was like, you're blaming everybody else for your problems but yourself. He was like, you chose to respond in the way that you did. He was like, there's plenty of people that went through what you went through that aren't in jail, right, Doug? And I'm like, yep. He's like, you have two choices. You could be a man, know that you got yourself here, and it's on you to change. Like, no one's coming to save you. No one. Because for my entire life up until that point, I wanted drugs to save me. I wanted validation from girls to save me. I wanted validation from people or sports or whatever to save me from my debauchery. And the only person that was going to do it was me. And he was like, you can be a man and know that it's up to you to change, or you can go be a little victim, cry in the corner and say, woe is me, and blame everybody else for your problems. And that allowed me to make this small shift in my identity to go from the guy that, and I think a lot of people, they do this where they go through hardship at a point in their life. And it's not the hardship that necessarily breaks them. It's that they continue to validate behaviors and decisions after that hardship and just point it back to that, because they're like, all right, like my life was hard, so I can go out and do this thing because of what I went through, and everybody will feel sorry for me and think it's okay. When in reality, what ends up happening is you make your life much worse, and you start to identify with that situation so much that you get so stuck. And once I realized that, I was like, wow, like clearly I'm not right. And so I just wanted to point that out, because I think a lot of times when people go through hard times, it's easy to get caught up in that cycle of, I'm just going to blame every decision I make back to this point. Even though that was hard, I'm going to continue to behave in this manner.
So I heard a game-changing expression, and that is, we judge ourselves by our intentions and we judge other people by their actions. And like, once I heard that, it changed how I apologized for things. My friend Patty, she's the Ph.D. in psychology. She coached me through this one time. I'll never forget. She's like, no, Layne, not an apology. You're trying to validate it. Here's how you do it, like explaining it to me. And, it really changed like the way I try to show up and own, things. And I may like say, if you want my explanation of where my head's at, I can give that to you. It doesn't make it okay, But I think if you're not willing to really own those mistakes and where you're at, like, things are just not going to change. And Doug, to your point, one of the things I'll say a lot is like, listen, your excuses are valid insofar as like this shaped your experience, and it definitely made you more prone to make certain decisions. But no matter where you are or what happened to you, somebody came from worse and did better. And so therefore your excuses are also invalid. And, I think that so many people get caught up in that mindset. I know this person is not popular right now, but Will Smith had a quote that I really liked. And he said, we try to tie together blame and responsibility. Something happened to us, and we want the responsibility of whatever happened to us or who did it. We want them to be responsible for fixing it. And the reality is they can't fix it. Nothing else can fix it. We have to fix it ourselves. And so you may have been hurt by other people or circumstances, but yes, the blame may lay with them, but the responsibility is on you to fix it as the individual.
I think that's one of the most haunting questions a person can ask themselves is, what am I going to do now? I think that's the scariest question. And Doug, I think it's fair to call out, man, what you experienced, it's the air we breathe in our culture, that because this bad thing happened to you, there's no accountability for what you do next. And we have to go searching for a boogeyman, a bad guy. And let's be super real. There are real boogeymen. There are bad actors out in the world, right? There are systems that marginalize people. There's make no question about that. But every single person is in search of who needs to hold the bag at the end of the day. And the sooner I can grab this thing and say, okay, it's up to me and the people I've created a community with to go solve this thing, the quicker it's going to get solved.
Yeah, I mean, they say if you want something done right, do it yourself. You got to take, Jocko talks about extreme ownership. You got to take accountability for it. You got to go for it. And John, you said, like, what am I going to do next? I was actually just talking to a good friend of mine today who's going through a really hard time with a health issue. And they said they felt like a burden to their family and that sort of thing. And I said, well, first off, you're not a burden. You know that. But, you're just in a place right now where you don't know what the next right move to make is. But you just got to start stepping. I talk about this in one of my talks, which is basically like the crux of it is that planning killed more dreams than failure ever did.
Yeah.
Not that planning is necessarily a bad thing, but so many people, they want to have the path laid out before them. And like, listen, the path isn't even set. You're going to start walking. You're going to end up off the path, like, and form a new path.
Okay, so tell me, I've seen this, Doug and Layne. Tell me if I'm crazy. It feels like one of the great new Xanaxes is a way of dealing with anxiety is more data, more planning, more info. Layne, you told me once, Delony, you're just majoring in the minors, man. Get enough protein and go lift, bro. Like, have your bowl of Lucky Charms and get on with your day. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but what about it's like more data and more data and more data and more planning and one more cup of coffee and one more cup of coffee. And I got to call my friend here and text this guy. Shut up and just start doing the thing, right? And get after it, man.
Do the thing. And like, even if you don't know what the next right step to move is, just start stepping. And what I mean by that is like putting yourself in the arena, showing up. Yeah, you're going to stumble. You're going to end up in the woods sometimes. But like inevitably, if you just stand still, like nothing is going to change and your life isn't going to improve. So like start stepping. Like I always think about, okay, what can I do right now where I'm at with what I have in this moment? And that has provided me a great amount of comfort in my life, despite how intimidating it may feel, because it's like, okay, if you're not dead, there's always a step you can take. You may not like it. You may not like your options, but there are options. And the other thing I've heard, I listened to, or I said to myself repeatedly is, I can't control the things that happen to me or all the things that happen to me, and I can't control the people around me. But I can control how I respond to what happens to me and the people around me. And that's provided me a lot of comfort in my life.
Yeah. I think, like John, to your point earlier, like we're always looking for this quick fixes to solve our problems, whether it be a new meditation or a new idea to help cure our anxiety or to do this or do that. And one of the things that's really helped me personally, I think that helps other people that I know, is this idea of just being able to embrace the discomfort, in that even though some of the things I was doing to healthily manage my anxiety would be like walking or going for a run or lifting at the gym, which were all great, sometimes I just needed to sit in the pain and just understand like what the heck is going on and gain some like self-awareness over my behaviors and my actions or what I'm worrying about. Because what would happen is something would happen in my business, something would happen personally, and I'd be like, all right, headphones on, put on some music and just go for a run. And I wouldn't even understand like why that bothered me so much. And that would become like a behavior and a pattern. So I think it's also important to point out that I think sometimes just sitting in the pain and getting comfortable with that discomfort and those feelings that come up is incredibly beneficial.
I'm just submitted the manuscript for a new book on building a non-anxious life. And here's the thing, the biggest takeaway from all the anxiety literature was this. Anything, whether it's opioids, whether it's sex, whether it's lifting weights, whether it's eating a bowl of carrots, whatever, any activity that you engage in to go away from the anxiety, to step away from it, out of its radius, reinforces it and makes it stronger. Your body gets what it wants, which is you to avoid the problem that it thinks might kill you. And the only way to heal from that anxiety is to head into the middle of the storm. That's it. That is it. And you got to show your body, I can go through it and we're going to be okay. And your body goes, sweet, I'm not going to sound the alarms anymore. And so, man, all of these Band-Aids and yogas and running and all that crap, we've created a whole universe around avoiding the anxiety. Dude, the only way is through the middle of the storm, man. That's it.
If you're going through hell, keep going, as Winston Churchill said, or the only way through it is through it. You know, if I think about like the hard times I've had in my life, one of the things I say to myself now when I start to feel those anxiety alarms go off is, I will be okay because I have always been okay, because I've decided that I'm okay.
And if you're not okay, you're dead. So there you go, right? It's like, I'm going to run from the tiger. And if it eats me, then I'm done. Or I can get away, right?
It's a bit of a reductionist thing, but it's kind of like, what is the worst possible outcome from anything? It's that you're dead, right? Like objectively, that is the worst possible outcome.
Right.
So, okay, I'm not there. Am I going to be destitute and not have a home? No. Am I going to go broke? Probably not. And then once you start checking off those things, it's like, okay, you know, all right, so maybe this is just my body reacting to this threat. And I like what you said, you know, my friend Patty, when I was going through my first divorce, one of the things I'll never forget, she said, because I was kind of reeling at the time, And she's like, Layne, you have got to learn how to self-soothe. You have got to learn how to sit in that discomfort. Like, you can't avoid this pain. Like, you have to take it. You have to take it. If you try to avoid it, it's going to be 10 times worse. And that's every time I've tried to avoid stuff, it's just piled and piled and piled and piled.
My doctor recently, here was the prescription I got. Like, I did some blood work, and the guy was like, all right, so your stuff looks good, and you're on a pretty quick, you're going to supernova. Your heart's going to explode. And it's like, you're running so hot. And here was the prescription, not meds, not a weightlifting routine. It was no headphones, go for a walk, preferably in the woods every day. And if you can take your dog with you, that'd be great. And I was like, that sounds like the most woo-woo nonsense. You want me to get some crystals too and do some somersaults and it was like, I need you to learn how to sit in you can't solve all this stuff. You can't run from all this stuff. You can't accomplish all this stuff. You got to just sit in that anxiety, like y'all just said. And man, that's tough. That's what I do for a living, and it's tough. It's tough.
Another thing I thought about a while back is I had somebody reach out to me in a Q&A and was like, hey, I think they were a single parent. They were going to school. They had all these things going on. And they were like, well, I want to compete in the physique show and I want to do this. And I said, hey, I think over the course of your life, you should live a balanced life. But in every single season of your life, you will be unbalanced. You know what I mean? Like when I was in graduate school competing in bodybuilding, I was unbalanced towards that. When I was, when my son was born, I became more unbalanced towards family, for those few months. And then when I was competing in powerlifting, I was, going to worlds, I was unbalanced towards that. And like, I think one of the big sources of maybe not anxiety, but displeasure for people is they feel like they should be able to do all of the things at all of the time. And the reality is you can only do some of the things all of the time. You can't do all of the things all of the time. And so you have to pick your things, right? And what I've told the clients so many times is like, hey, maybe in this season of your life, this is not reasonable. Like if you're going to be doing a degree and working a job and doing a physique show, you're going to have pretty like reasonable expectations of what your social life's going to look like, i.e. nothing, right? Which is fine. Like that's fine. Right. Like over the course of your life, you don't want to not have a social life, but for brief periods, it's okay. But you have to really like choose your things and realize that, hey, you can't do everything all the time and be everything for everyone.
Here's a practical application you gave me, Layne. I got a hotel and locked myself in the hotel for a couple of weeks to finish this book. And I mentioned to you, like when I write, I just surround myself with snacks. It's a mindless, maniacal thing. It's not good. And you said something so passive and so simple, which was, well, then don't waste the calories. Then go lift. And I've never considered not sitting down and writing and also being filled with shame that I'm not also coming in under my caloric, right? And so I chose to not be mad at myself, and I had some more calories than I normally do, and I lifted heavier than I normally do, and I came out on the other side of it, and I did gain some weight, and I got a lot stronger, and most importantly, I didn't go to war with myself this whole time, right? And it was a little bit of an out of balance season. And now I got to come back in under the caloric, like I got to get smart about what I'm doing, but it was a season and now we're good. And so it's not hating myself through this thing, not declaring civil war on myself the whole time.
I think a lot of that gets back to like, shame stuff and our shoulds. Shoulds are, I just had a should that got me all kinds of problems, but your shoulds and your shame, like they'll make you do things that are really bad. And I think, just being a little bit more gentle with yourself, like holding yourself to high standards, but also realizing that you're a freaking human being and you can't be all the things all the time. So like you're finishing a book. Okay. Like, so you ate a little bit extra. Who cares?
Exactly.
Like,
congratulations.
Big deal. Did you smack around your kids and your wife? No, of course not. Like, you're still like doing all the things, but I think social media has made this worse, which is the pressure to feel like you can do everything and be everything for everybody. And it's like, well, you got to get up in the morning and meditate for 10 minutes. And then you got to do a cold plunge. And then, you've got to do this. like your self-improvement regimen could easily be a full-time job if you listen to every self-help expert. And so one of the things I tell people is like, I'm like, all that stuff's great. I'm not doing 90% of it. Like, I'm going to focus on the big rocks. You know what I mean? Like, incrementally move forward. Great. But I'm not going to like sit here and fill up my plate with a bunch of stuff that I can't possibly do. And now I'm going to feel shame that I'm not meeting my expectations. Like, I'm going to commit to stuff that I know I can execute.
I think the Cam Hanes and the David Goggins of the world, I think those guys are great because they show a guy like me who leans too much on how I feel when I wake up, who leans too much on motivation. Like, I can't get through that today. I can look at those guys and go, yeah, I can. But those are not great blueprints for a well-balanced whole life, right? That is every culture needs Einsteins out there saying, pushing the boundaries. But for us mortals in here, okay, how do I really charge ahead hard and create a life worth living, right?
Yeah. And I think that's like the issue with the self-help space, right? Is that it's great, obviously, in thought, but the problem is you get people that just identify so hard with some certain people that they think they need to like replicate every single thing that these people do instead of saying, okay, like I like that idea. That's reasonable to implement in my life. I like this idea from that person. I mean, it aligns with where I'm at, and just seeing where that goes versus like trying to take every single thing that you can possibly get, fill your plate up and just completely overwhelm yourself.
Well, I think, Doug, like the self-help thing is kind of a big flex, to be honest, like on
Yeah.
social media as well. It's like, look at all these books I'm reading. I'm like, yeah, but you're still doing the same dumb stuff. Like, just do one and execute, like I'm big on execution. I'm like, let's just do this. Like when people ask, how many books do you read? I'm like, probably a lot less than you would think. But I'm like, if I just, I was telling somebody how helpful listening to John's podcast was, because when I go in for therapy, sometimes I end up just venting too much rather than actually like getting something out of it. And listening to John's podcast and how he talks to people about their problems, I was like, wow. And there were just times where I'm like, okay, let's just do that. It was like, I just, whatever gets you to that place where you're actually executing, like putting in positive things into your life, like do that. Like if it's self-help books, great. But like, if you feel like overwhelmed by your self-help stuff, it's no longer self-help,
Right. So I got two things. One is when people call or they write me and they say, hey, I've read Van der Kolk, I've read Gabor Mate. What's the next book on trauma I should read? I always tell them, you're done reading. You've read all you need to read. Now you got to start doing the work. And any more reading is you avoiding the work. Listen to Layne when it comes to lifting weights and nutrition. Listen to Adam and those guys at Mind Pump. After those two voices, you're done. Any more noise is you choosing to divert yourself from the actual work. So that's number one. Here's the second thing, and I hate to admit what I'm about to say, okay? Because it goes against some of the things I preach, but it's true. I have made my whole career, like the last 20 years, I've spent my life behind closed doors with some pretty powerful people who are struggling. And then the doors open and I go left and they go right. Nobody ever knows we met. And that's just been that was what I wanted to do. And I always believed in a core common humanity. At the end of the day, regardless of your job or how much money you have or whatever, we're all the same. We're all dads, we're all husbands, we're all moms, we're all figuring it out. And then I did an event with Jocko and I was about 30 minutes into this, we're on stage in front of a bunch of people. I realized, oh, we're different, man. Like you've worked for 20 or 30 years to filter a lot of this stuff out because you are a warrior. Like this is like you have transcended some things that I'm choosing to allow into my life. And so I had to realize I'll never be that guy. And he has worked for 30 years to become this guy. And I have to make peace with that. I'm not going to be Jocko. Not going to happen. I'm not going to be a SEAL. I'm not going to be elite fighting force. We have this whole poser culture with the military now where a bunch of dudes like want to be that, but they're not. Like, we're not that. We're not that. And so what can we do with our kids, our spouses, our romantic partners, in our homes, in our jobs, in the world we've been provided, in the world we're making for ourselves? What can we do in that space, man?
Yeah. So like getting back to the conversation of like masculinity and emotion and talking about like when to react and making sure it's all in line with our character. How can somebody who's listening to this, or maybe it's somebody that they know, like go from being in a hyper emotional state to making sure that they're processing all that properly while also like being able to express that and communicate that in a way that's effective for change?
It's a simple science, man. When I'm emotional, my brain has unhooked my critical thinking. It's off. So any response I have in that moment is reactive, whether that's with my kid, whether that's with my boss, whether that's with my wife, whether it's with the guy who just cut me off in traffic. I have to have built-in pauses there. The second thing is, that's why I've got close friends that I can call and say, am I looking at this problem right? And I trust Layne to say, no, dude, you're not looking at this right. Or him to be like, yeah, you're getting hosed on this one, man. Like, you have to have those people that are plugged in rationally and they are not emotional on an issue and they're happy to give you that. If I go to social media, it will tell me what I want to hear, and then it will continue to upregulate what I want to hear, and it will just make my problems bigger and make me the center of all the whole issue. Man, I got to turn that crap off. So I got to cut off bad intel, and I've got to reach out to people who can support me. But all of that is, I have to choose. My response is less important than the relationship here.
Yeah, man, that's so great. John, I mean, I'm just going to go back to like what you were talking about with connection with people and good people to check you, and support you. And I think the things I love about my best friends is without almost any fail, they are all firm but fair, which means when I do something right, they will absolutely unabashedly heap praise on me and tell me how great I am. And when I do something wrong, they will absolutely directly tell me that they think I did something wrong. And when I say wrong, I usually mean like out of alignment with who they believe I am as a person, right? And that has just been so helpful. And I think that's because, when like you have that balance, that just develops so much trust for me in a friendship, that I know that you are going to give me the credit. You're not just going to tell me when I do something wrong. But I also know that like if you're telling me I did something wrong, maybe I disagree, but I'm damn well going to listen. You know what I mean? Because I trust that you know me as a person and who I want to be as a person. And so if you're telling me that something is out of alignment, man, I am going to sit down and listen because we've built that trust. And so again, that has been the biggest difference in my life over compared to, 2016 when my life imploded. Was, the people around me when my life imploded were mostly, not all, but mostly kind of yes men and women, or people who were just highly critical in general. And so I didn't have that trust with anybody that I felt like could just give it to me straight. And in fact, I rely on my friends' counsel so much that some people have accused me of like not making my own decisions. And I'm like, no. I will listen to input, but I do make my own decisions. But I just really value wise counsel from people who are not emotionally invested the same way I am. It's the reason that great coaches exist. I think, really good friends in a way are like great coaches, right? If it was just as simple as doing the dang thing, then every single coach would be the greatest in his sport, right? Like, because you have say a Michael Jordan, just tell somebody what you did and then they will go execute it. But it's not that simple. You have to find a way to relate to people and build trust. And I think that great coaches have that. And I think that great friends have that.
Hey, Doug, can I ask you a hard question?
Go for it.
It's not uncommon for folks who have a gnarly past with opiates to struggle with deep friendships, not romantic relationships, but deep friendships. Have you found that to be the case or no?
Yes and no. I mean, I've definitely had I have some deep, meaningful friendships that I've had for years, but I've also realized that because of my past and having trust issues with people picking on me and my relationship with my dad and all these things, that it made me feel like it made me have a guard up almost with guys sometimes and having deep, meaningful friendships. Cause I was like, all right, what does this person want from me? Are they going to pick on me? Are they going to mistreat me? Are they going to break my trust? Are they going to lie to me? Like all these things that I may have experienced when I was a kid. And it led me to always have my guard up and being like, all right, what do they want from me? You know what I mean? And like, where's this going to go? Where's this going to lead? And so, yeah, I've definitely had like issues with all of that. And I think the other thing that it's caused certain issues in with me is that at times I feel that I have to like show up in a certain way for people, and I have to give and help, because in the recovery community, it's all about being of service, right? It's all about helping other people. So I'm always like, my brain's almost always wired to say, how can I help people if they're struggling? How can I help people if they're struggling? And even in the business that I do with my training clients and coaching clients and people that I help with addiction through fitness, it's like emotionally, it can take a toll on me sometimes. And I have a hard time shutting it off, because it's like, all right, if I don't do this thing, is it because I'm selfish? Is it because I'm, letting people down? So, I mean, I still definitely battle with some of that stuff, but it's not as much as like when I first got out of jail.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that, man.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely vibe with that. Like the most powerful word I've learned in the last 10 years is no. It's like for a decade, I answered every single email, every private message, every podcast I got invited on. I did it regardless of the size. And I got to a point where I realized this is actually like my own addiction, like feeling useful or helpful. It's like, but if I say yes to some of these things, it means I'm saying no to my kids. You know what I mean? And I will feel bad to this day. But, John, you said it, choose guilt over resentment, because, I don't want to take on a task. And I had this, like, even recently, a good reminder where I took on a task and then I got to the actual thing I was doing. I'm like, I felt super resentful because I basically, accepted less than I knew what my value was worth, but I felt like I should, there's that word again, do it. And so like I would find myself getting in points where I'm like, well, I'm not going to do this thing for them because of how I was feeling. And I was like, wait a minute, no, I agreed to this. I have to show up, But it was a good reminder of, okay, you don't have to agree to this. Like, you're in control. And, saying no, you can always play that game. I've had people say, well, why can't you show up for that? And it's like, well, I could go all the way. Why am I not just flying over to Africa and giving up all my worldly possessions to help people less fortunate than me? Like, you can, if you reduce that down to its purest form, like, you'll drive yourself crazy. And so, like, now I just put in the space of, like, I'm going to help as many people as I can. But if I'm not good and I'm not good in my own home, I don't want to grow up and, like, have helped all these people and then my kids hate me. Like, to me, I would be an abject failure if that was the case.
I think one of the most powerful like things I ever heard was, and going back, this all goes back to relationships. And we were talking before, it reminded me of something, is that like, it's like the person who thinks they know everything knows nothing, right? Like, once you think that, and it taught me when I heard this to know that I'm not always going to be the smartest person in the room. And as a matter of fact, if I'm the smartest person in the room, I got to get into a different room. And it's also taught me that there's certain types of people you need to spend time with. And I just talked about this on a podcast I did, to where, and it's specifically when you're going through hard times, it's even more important that when you're going through adversity, like, you really need to be mindful of where you're spending your time and who you're spending it with. Because if you spend time with people that are complainers, they're going to validate you complaining. They're going to validate you making all these mistakes, and you're going to end up getting used to that as a way of dealing with problems. If you spend time with people that are just checking out and escaping and running from the pain and using substances, then you're going to be more likely to do that. And then the third person, I was like, you can't spend time with people where they're picking on you or they're bullying you or they're talking down to you and you're becoming like the butt of their jokes and stuff. Like, you have to make sure that you're honoring yourself and making sure that who you spend time with isn't making your problems worse, because sometimes that can be what it is that you're just around some bad people and you need to get better relationships in your life.
That's a real important message, but I think there's a really important message underneath it, which is, that's why you'll hear Layne and I tell people, don't borrow money. Because if I owe money to somebody and then my boss starts treating me less than, I can't leave. I can't. I got 2 kids. And you know what? Your amygdala knows that. And it's always sounding the alarm. Hey, you're not safe. You're not safe. You're not safe. You're not safe. Because one bad day with boss, man, you lose your house and you lose your car and you lose your food. And so there's something about creating a world where I can walk out that door. And then I'm going to choose to be here. And now you got to hold everything. Your physiology is different when I'm here because I'm choosing to be here, not because I'm stuck and I gotta be here. And then I think once I've taken care of this platform, then, man, then I can begin to say, hey, I'm not going to hang around complainers. I'm not going to hang around people who bring me down. I'm not going to be around X, Y, or Z, because I've created a world where that's possible for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in that place where I've had people close to me who were very, very negative and very, very critical. And I mean, it's debilitating. And like, I mean, John, you said at one time, the best way to describe it is like my body was vibrating. You know what I mean? Like, it's like every day I'm waking up like, how can I make this day work? How can I make this, how do I not screw up today? That sort of thing.
And that's a defense, right? That's like playing football and being like, hey, I don't have any offensive plays today. How do I just try to win this game playing defense? You'll never win.
Just don't give up points. Okay, but then you still can't score.
What a terrible way to play. That's a boring game to watch.
Yeah, so I think that, that's tough because a lot of people feel like whether it's friends or romantic relationships or the people they work for, that they can't do any better. And it's you're not going to solve your life quickly. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and we were saying, like, it's like a snowball. You make a bunch of good choices, you're not going to see the fruits of that really quickly. Like, you're going to see them down the road as that snowball builds, and then it's going to really amplify, right? And you make a bunch of negative choices, you're going to see that kind of snowball build as well. And you may not see the negative consequences immediately, but you will see them. And so it boils down to, like, again, making those small decisions that are in alignment with your values over time, so that when the consequences do come, they're the consequences that you want and not the consequences you don't want.
It's the value of compounded interest, right? Like, you see this a lot in money. You see this in fitness. Like, even when I was a trainer, early in my career, I should say, as a trainer, the conversations I would have with my clients, I would relate it back to money. It's like kind of like investing. Like, if you invest a little bit into your fitness now, over time, that'll build up. And when you're 70, you're not going to be having these massive medical bills. You'll be more likely to be able to walk up and down the steps, spend more time with your kids and that sort of thing. And it's like, how do you want to invest your time in this moment? Like, do you want to put in a little bit of time, or do you want to, have regret that you're spending a lot of money, not putting that time in later on in your life? Layne, I know you got to go soon. So I guess to pivot really quick, and the last thing I wanted to kind of chat with you guys about is, I think a lot of what people struggle with specifically now is uncertainty. Banks are collapsing. We got a lot of stuff going on in the economy.
Heads are falling off.
Yeah, exactly. How do we deal with it?
I'll tell you how I deal with it. I don't watch the news. I don't. I have a few different accounts I follow on social media that are actually legitimately unbiased, so I can know what's going on, but they don't spread fear, that sort of thing. But it's like, if you want to really go down the rabbit hole of, banks collapsing, inflation's rampant, nuclear war, you'll just sit in the corner and not move all day. I'm not saying none of that stuff isn't real, and there isn't the specter of that. But if I live my day-to-day life like that, nothing in my life is going to get done. And I can't control any of that stuff. And if that comes to pass, I got way bigger problems than what we're talking about right now, right? So I'm going to assume that things will be okay in the world, as they always have been. And I'm going to continue to execute on my day-to-day stuff. And you know what? If that stuff comes to pass, then we'll have to deal with it when it comes. But right now, I'm not going to spend my time worrying about that, because there's literally zero I can do about it.
Controlling what you can control, I think, Doug, is crucial. And here's how I've come to do that. I have a life philosophy called I've Got a Guy. And what I try to do is, I know what I know, and it's a very limited amount of things. And even the things I know change all the time, because that's what science does. You know what I don't know anything about, even though I've been doing it forever? Lifting and nutrition. You know who does? Layne. So I call him, and I know that's a privilege, but I call him and be like, hey, how do I do this, man? I've got a buddy who's an HVAC expert. So the other day, I got a buddy I'll just say in the military community. When Trump bombed the Iran general during his term, I just got a text message that said, things may have just been set off. Go fill up your cars with gas. That's all it said. And I was like, I'm going to go get gas. That's a thing I could do. And when Russia invaded, I texted and said, are we good? And the text I got back was, we're good. And I called my buddy, one of my oldest friends in the world. He's a banking commissioner. I said, hey, is this bad? And he said, yes, call me. So I called him, and he said, this could be bad. It looks like the Fed moved. And I said, so what do I do? And he goes, what are you going to do? You're going to hide all your money in a shoebox? And I was like, oh, no. And so he gave me a little bit of data, and then I got on about my day. Because like Layne said, there's literally nothing I can do. Nothing. Zero things. And so if the American banking system collapses, the world as we know it is over, right? And my neighbor's going to shoot me for water. And so I will deal with, that's a whole other thing. And so knowing which crypto to move my cash into, that's all theater, dude. So all I have to say is control what you can control. And I've got somebody that I can ask. And beyond that, man, I'm sleeping just fine.
I appreciate you both, man, sharing everything that you've shared and talking about all this stuff openly and honestly, because like I said, it's not only hard to talk about, but a lot of people are having a hard time right now. A lot of people are struggling. So I wanted to thank you both for having this open conversation. And I'm sure people, maybe if they're listening to this and they're not familiar with each of you, maybe they're not familiar with each of you, I think, it'd be helpful to maybe share like where people can find out more about you, anything exciting you're working on, and that sort of thing.
Biolayne.com. That's my website. That's where we put all of our stuff on social media. Biolayne. Instagram is my digital business card. So feel free to look me up on there and check out the content I put up. And I'm also on YouTube and most of the other platforms. So that's how to find me.
And Outwork Nutrition, dude, the best. I've got about 50 or 60 grams of that stuff pulsing through my body right now, man. It's the best. It's the best protein on the market.
And you can find that on my Instagram and my website as well. So thank you, John, for that. I appreciate it.
I mean, look at this upper body, man. If you want this, it's probably a terrible, terrible way to sell your protein, bro. And you can find me at John Delony, and you can find my show. I got Dr. John Delony Show. It's a call-in mental health show and a relationship show. You can call in, and I co-host Dave Ramsey's The Ramsey Show sometimes too. So talking about finances and relationships. So just find me on the internets, man, at John Delony. A new book coming out I'm pretty jazzed about. I'm pretty hyped. So it'll be coming out this fall.
Fantastic shows. Everybody should listen to those.
Awesome. Yeah, the great shows for sure. I will make sure to include the links to all that stuff in the show notes. And for those listening, there was so much ground covered. We talked about so much. What I invite you to do is to share your biggest takeaway. When you share your takeaway, tag John, tag Layne, tag myself. We'd love to hear your feedback. And we once again thank you for listening to this episode of The Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst. We'll see you next time.